Are you trying to run EM simulations and you need to decide what's the best software strategy for you? In this video, I'm going to break down the three main options that you have, which is either buying commercial software, building your own solution on top of open source simulation components, or finding an expert that can do this for you and provide you the simulation results as a service. And of course, there are many different trade-offs, many different use cases in this industry. There are even points in between here. And we're going to discuss which is the best solution for your project, for your team, and your budget. By the way, I am Martin Mas. I am a professor of applied mathematics and founder of Epsilon Forge, a company that specializes in electromagnetic simulations. Let's start by discussing commercial software. What are the advantages? Why so many people want to buy commercial software? The first one that comes to mind is that it's feature rich. That means it's typically going to be an all-in-one solution. This will include its own CAD system, mesh generation, many different options for meshing, many different solver options, and even built-in post-processing. So it's an all-in-one. So you only buy one software and you have probably everything you need and probably many features that you don't need as well. The second one is that it's an industry standard, so it's a safe choice. I mean a safe choice if you are a manager or you have to tell it to your manager, like, we're going with this tool which everybody else is using. So, it's an advantage. Being an industry standard also means that probably your competitors are also using this tool. So whatever they can do, maybe you should be able to do it as well. And if you cannot do something with this tool, it means probably they cannot as well. The final advantage to mention, probably the main advantage, is that it comes with support and training. So you can have someone on the phone helping you out. You can take a course in learning how to use this, and you can even get certified as a simulation expert. So some people look for jobs based on this certification. So it's kind of self-reinforcing. Now, what are the disadvantages? Now, this comes at a heavy price. So we're talking about 50,000 USDs upfront and then annual costs. By the way, this is a very low estimate. So it can be 80, 90,000. I've written a blog post about the pricing information that is out there. It turns out that the pricing is really opaque. It is really hard to get information on prices. They're not listed on the websites to begin with. In order to get a quote, you need to contact a vendor, have several meetings with them, tell them about which industry you are in, which application you want to do, have them demonstrate the capabilities of the software. All this even before you start discussing pricing. Pricing information not being really out there, it makes it hard to estimate, but on the basis of what many people have told me and my own experience working in an R&D center, this is nowhere cheap. And it comes with also several limitations. You typically have to accept a software that's going to be limited to 4 cores. So if you want to run it on a higher end CPU, you have to pay extra. Also, they want to limit this to a single engineer. So, and everything you want to deviate from there is extra money. Then there is vendor lock-in. This comes from using proprietary file formats. Yeah, so once you get your work inside of the tool, it is hard to get it out. And other techniques. Essentially, you have a sunk cost because you trained your people on how to use this tool and it took you long and you spend money doing it. So it's hard to make the decision to change. And this might sound a little bit harsh, outdated core tech, but commercial companies prioritize stability over incorporating leading edge algorithms, right? And they also privilege being able to integrate with their existing software. So they are not as up to date as you would expect for the money that you pay. In my experience, we can write research-grade code, which will have the latest algorithms and completely crush the performance of these commercial tools. Let's move on to the second alternative, which is open source. So the first big advantage is that it's got no licensing cost, so it's zero. You can use any hardware you want, so you can use a big CPU, or you can even run it on the cloud for the same zero cost. And it's highly customizable. Do you like to use Python for scripting? Do you want to use an external CAD system for designing? This might sound like, building your own GUI. It is getting cheaper and cheaper over time to build software thanks to AI coding. But what are the disadvantages? Well, the first one is that there might be missing features. So for example, special boundary conditions. So the fact that these conditions are missing doesn't mean that you cannot incorporate them, but it means that it will take you some extra time to do this yourself. So you have to add to the software. Another obvious disadvantage is it's harder to use. So typically no GUIs or limited GUIs. You will need to write code in order to be able to use them. And there is non-professional support typically. By this, I mean going in forums and stuff like that. Of course, you can pay for professional support, sometimes to the same developers of the open source library or to external parties, but it is not built into the solution and it is less standard. So if you are in a company and you have to tell your manager, hey, I want to use this open source tool, I'm going to take a couple of months of learning it and I'm going to be adding some features, managers will see this as risky. Maybe you have a manager who has a PhD on EM simulations and he's familiar with this, or maybe you have a PhD and you've been hired because of your expertise in open source simulations. If you're in that situation, that would be great. But typically, if you're an engineer and you just joined the company and you are tasked with running simulations, you have a manager who maybe he's already been sold by these companies. He doesn't want to make a risky decision, and so you can also make that decision. Now, let's move on to the third option, which is the done-for-you service. So it will save you time. It will save you time in many, many ways, especially when compared to the alternatives, which is either buying commercial software, learning how to use open source. When you buy commercial software, it will take you several weeks or even months just to negotiate the license, right? So in the time of you negotiating the license, you might just hire an expert consultant and assign them a task and got the results already. So just let's write no delays, right? There are no delays. You can start with small milestones. They already have the expertise, so there's no learning curve. Then a second advantage is that it is scalable. So you can do some simulations now, some later. Maybe you have a deadline and you need to rush at some point, but then you can pause as you need. And finally, I believe it's cost effective because you pay for solutions. You don't have to pay for software. You don't have to pay for hourly wages to your staff when they are using the commercial software. This is something that we do, which is project-based pricing. You need to determine what are you expecting to get from the simulations and you define it, and then you get a quote for that, for the result. You just need to focus on what you want to get from the EM simulations. I believe it's more transparent. However, what are the disadvantages? Well, the first one is that it requires trust. So this means that if you're handling sensitive IP information, you might need the consultant to sign an NDA. Maybe not an option. If you just have to disclose critical IP, maybe you cannot do it sometimes. There is also this lack of control, which is that you give the consultant an objective and they are expected to come back with a solution and you cannot really control what are they working on. So you might need to negotiate deadlines. And then the quality might vary, right? If you're looking for people on these freelancer websites, Upwork, you try to pay them 20 an hour and they can be sloppy. In order to compensate for this, you might want to ask for what credentials do they have and reviews. Okay, so those were the three options, and a little bit about us is that we are a company that's the spin-off from the University of Buenos Aires. I am a professor there. I have been doing research, teaching, and I have worked in industry, and I have worked as a consultant, of course, for several companies. I have my own software, and I use a lot of open source components to build it. And our services, as you might have noticed, maybe there was a little bias in my presentation, but this is what we're most excited about right now, which is the done-for-you service. So, right, we take care of the software, of provisioning the hardware, and we set up several meetings where we discuss the scope of the project. What do you want to achieve with the EM simulations? And what data do you have? What data you can share with us? How we can set up a model that will capture the essential physics that you need for your goals. It should be simple enough, but not simpler to get cost-effective solutions. And you will just get all the insights we can extract from that model. So the best trade-off is probably people that need occasional simulations. I mean, if you need some simulations to move on with your project, and then you can pause and you can do something else. A good example of this is a client of us. It's a medical device startup. Medical devices is a highly multidisciplinary field, as you can imagine. They have to deal with a ton of things, from the human body to how this device is going to be used by a surgeon, how this device is going to be manufactured. And of course, also there is some electromagnetic component to it, but it's not the core thing. The other interesting thing we can do is complex simulations. And by complex, I mean the type of simulations that you typically need to run on an HPC system because it's just very, very large. Even if you have commercial software, even if you are using it, this might have a super, super high extra cost. You can just outsource that particular simulation to us. For example, let's say that you have designed an antenna and you want to solve the antenna placement problem in an airplane, right? When you have the antenna here, and this is super electrically large, and you typically spend most of your time, designing the details of the antenna rather than solving this problem. So this is a type of simulation that needs to be run on an HPC, but it's only run occasionally. So we go back to the occasional things. The second service that we are offering is open source training. So if you want to adopt open source tools because you think it's a core capability that you want to have in-house, we can provide customized training programs. We will focus on different milestones and we'll go from one to the other until you reach your final goal. We'll make sure that it's highly targeted for what you want to do. Finally, you can contact us. This is our information and Epsilon Forge, and you can book a free consultation.